Hey, Aster here to remind you that Genshin Impact is a really sad game. So, today we're going to be talking about lore, and really sad lore, and ranking them based on how sad they actually are. Alright, let's start from the bottom. Ajax's story actually has a lot of deeper implications to it that a lot of people don't really see. It's the implication that most of the Fatui, in all retrospect, are people, you know? It's a really good glimpse into the other Fatui that are also suffering and cannot go back to their families. So we're just going to put that implication up there. Raiden's story is a very tragic story about how a god can basically lose everything in an instant, no matter how omnipotent you think they are. Raiden's story actually gives you a lot of perspective when it comes to what does it mean for the quote-unquote present. And I think it's a very human thing, in all honesty. It's a very human thought, right? Time waits for nobody. We as mortals don't have a lot of time, and what would you give if you can keep, change from happening? And that includes her loss of her sister, of her friends, and of Inazuma slowly but surely because of the Vision Hunt decree. It's that preservation of eternity. I don't think a lot of people give enough credit to Raiden's story because of its execution, but the themes are there and the themes are present, Ganyu's story is actually relatively sad, but I'm going to be putting it a little on the low side of the made me feel empty. So if you don't know what Ganyu's story is, like, the main motif of it is that looking for your place in this world isn't so simple, even if you have lived in this world for a long time. And besides, she isn't relatively human because she's going to eventually outlive even the Liu Qixing. So she's going back to square one over and over again with all the quote-unquote lifetimes she had to go through. I think that's pretty sad. I think that's pretty upsetting, especially since she can't really relate to the actual gods because, she's half Adepti. Maybe she can relate to, my girl Yanfei, but I'm putting it on made me feel empty, made me feel relatively empty. I'm putting Kujou on made me feel empty just from this story Archon quest. And the thing is, I didn't really exactly read her lore. I'm going to be completely frank with you. I'm going to be putting her in made me feel empty just because if you really think about it, you can't help but feel kind of sad for Sarah when she found out that the people that took her in and raised her as their own and taught her how to live, basically, just lied to her. But lied in a way that it showed her just how corrupt people's ideals could be, and that her own sense of justice is just gone. I don't know, there's just something about that, believing in something so much for your entire life because you're somewhat obligated to believe that because, the people that took you in were, believe that as well. It's kind of like your parents' kind of dilemma. Albedo's story is relatively sad, all things considered. One is that he's not human, that in and of itself, and two is that he's actually corrupted and probably going to snap and kill everything in Mondstadt. So I don't know how to tell you, homeboys got it rough. But in all honesty, Albedo's story is very scary. When I say that his backstory is sad, I mean that it made me genuinely feel upset, right? It made me feel pity. But for Amber, she doesn't want that. Her story demands you to feel inspired. And I think that's really great, from just how she treats Collei, how she treats the other Knights of Favonius, how she even regards herself as an outrider, even though the title of an outrider is already dead after her grandfather left. The way that she presents herself as a very eccentric and very happy person. Barbara also fills in that kind of shoes, and the thing is, Barbara's story is relatively bland. Barbara is also a very inspiring kind of character, just with less depth, I think. She has less baggage to deal with, even with her own sister and her own problems. She only gets depressed 30 seconds a day. I don't know if that's good control of your emotions or really unhealthy coping mechanism. Beidou is also one that isn't sad. Beidou is self-confident. Beidou doesn't need your pity. Beidou's story is not sad. It's uplifting. Now, while I said that Amber's story is uplifting, Bennett, on the other hand, just makes me feel really upset for a kicked puppy. that's trying its best to like stand up and then gets shoved on the ground multiple times. Bennett's story, if you don't know, I think his story 5 is what really got me really upset. If you don't know, in his story 5, he contemplates about death, which is really scary. He says that he's perfectly fine with dying. He's perfectly fine with the fact that dying isn't the end of an adventure, it's the beginning. Because once you die, your legacy starts moving on and people start talking about ballads about you. They start talking about your history, and that's when you actually become a part of legacy. And there's just something about that, right? Hearing a child tell you, yeah, I'm okay with dying. Because at that point, he just accepted that he's just too unlucky. And what's even sadder is that, like, I think it's the end of those, like, lines where it just says, not even the gods would give him, you know, something like that. I don't know. Just hearing that. And not to mention his bad luck. Just, dude, give this boy a break. He doesn't deserve that. He's been so kind. I know it's, like, more of a character gimmick, but at the same time, if you actually, you know, dive deep into his story, you can tell that he used to be affected by it, and rightfully so. Chong Yun's story is actually relatively deep. Chong Yun's story is very inspiring and uplifting, but at the same time, it also has that level of doubt that he has as a character. Like, he himself was asked before by Xingqiu, what will you do if you already purge all the spirits in the world? And I think it was the moment that Chong Yun didn't respond and couldn't respond to that the story made him realize that he doesn't really have anything besides exorcism and thaumaturgy. I think it's that writing of the level of his own uncertainty that I think just takes the cake for. He's not inspiring, but he's also not depressing as a story. I like his backstory. I really like his backstory. Diluc is upsetting. Diluc is very upsetting. I'll be real with you. Diluc is relatively upsetting just because it's a story about revenge. And personally, I think revenge is it's a cliche way of doing it, right? But the Fatui, one of his main nemesis, is still out there. And his story is genuinely just not done. Just losing your father at a young age is something that you cannot laugh at or like belittle. Just the fact he lost and the fact that it had such an impact on him that it also broke his relationship with Kaya is really, really upsetting. Diona used to look up to her father a lot and would normally blame alcohol for the way that her father changed his personality. Diona for me is a very real story. Alcoholism and children blaming alcohol instead of their family's vices because they are too young to understand that their parents are just like that is unfortunately very real. And I don't know, the fact that her story just has that level of reality engraved into it, just because, like, oh, it's really funny that she doesn't like the wine industry, but if you actually look deeper into why she doesn't like it, it just becomes so upsetting. She wants to be regarded as, like, her father's favorite again. She wants to mend her relationship with her father, and she really hates alcohol for quote-unquote changing her father. But the thing is, she doesn't understand that it's not the alcohol's fault. That perspective from a child is not something that you should be raised with. I don't know. Yula's story actually shows you just how cruel Mondstadt could be. And you actually see a glimpse of this with Venti in the prologue of the book. You see that Venti's story talks about the old aristocratic system of Mondstadt, and Yula just puts on the continuation of that. The Lorens clan are a bunch of, you know, slave owners. Trying to break out from a family legacy has got to be one of the hardest things that a person can do, especially for someone that's so engraved into a history of an entire city. An aristocrat that's put in the spotlight definitely is going to get so much flack. And the thing is, Eula presents herself this way because one, she really doesn't know how to present herself, and two, if you actually look at the intricacies of her story, it says there that she wants to solve problems. And she found out that if you start invoking the word vengeance, that's how it gets people to stop making problems. To her, it's a magic word, which is probably why she repeats it a lot. And I don't know, a lot of people obviously see her as really scary, really rash, and obviously she doesn't have the best people skills. But at the same time, you really gotta feel for her, because if you're raised in a hostile environment, not only by your family but also your peers, you kind of develop that, even if your morals are against it. So Eula is a very interesting case study of that. Nurture versus nature, I would say. So I'm going to put her in Made Me Feel Them. I think that Ayaka's story is sad because she and her brother needed to grow up at a young age. She needed to understand immediately the concepts of being a noble, and the fact that she didn't have any friends growing up, even if you count Thoma, it's kind of upsetting because she was always birthed to be put on a pedestal just like her brother, but in reality, if you look at both of them, they're pretty chill. No pun intended. Fischl. Ooh, Fischl. Ooh, if Bennett's story makes you sad, Fischl's is heartbreaking. Bennett is constantly bullied now, but there's a part of Fischl that makes you feel connected to her because it's a very real thing. And if you play Genshin Impact, you definitely understand this kind of feeling, the feeling of escapism. Being bullied from a very young age for your own fantasies and the fact that you're quote-unquote a little different is a very real and unfortunate thing that happens to people. Fischl wasn't doing anything wrong. And then, as much as we say that she's quote-unquote cringe and she's stuff like that, remember, she was 14 at a time. And she was already isolated by her peers to the point that the moment she heard her parents say, hey, maybe it's time for you to grow up and put your books down, she had no other outlet for her own creativity because the only people that actually accepted that creative side of her stopped. And if you look at how she reacts to how people treat her, she's very happy when people indulge her quote-unquote fantasies or when she actually feels validated. And sometimes that's all a person needs. Fischl's story isn't the grandest of anything, but it's human. Just a human feeling of validation for something that you feel proud for yourself. Just the thought of being isolated is mortifying, even by people that you love, as you saw how she ran off from her parents on her 14th birthday. And it's even sadder when you think about her vision in retrospect. Her vision is the manifestation of her ambition to have not only an outlet for her emotions, but finally someone to connect to. Someone who would understand who the Prinzessin de Verurteilung is. And that's sad. Like, the fact that she had to make her own friend is a really sad implication. And I know that it wasn't out of, her volition that Oz existed. But we know that visions come from a person's deepest desires and ambitions. So she just wanted a friend. And of course she does have Bennett now, but she didn't have Bennett before. Hu Tao for me isn't a story that's meant to feel upsetting. Hu Tao's story is meant to be somber. Hu Tao herself is a very bright character, but Hu Tao is somber. It doesn't make me feel sad, it doesn't make me feel anything, but what it makes me feel is contemplative. It makes you feel your mortality. Hu Tao already understands what it's like to lose someone you care for, and what it feels like to bear a legacy of 77, ancestors. I put her in I do not feel emotions like the Chongyun. It's not happy, it's not sad either. Jean's story is relatively uplifting. Jean's story is one about hard work. It's about understanding that you cannot do everything on your own. You have a legacy to uphold, but at the same time, you don't have to do it by yourself. You have friends that will guide you and will protect you and will make sure that you get sleep at night. And she shows you the human side and the unfortunate side of when it comes to, you know, leading and trying to be a people pleaser, trying to fix everything. It makes you stop for a bit, take a step back, and think about yourself. Kaeya. Ooh, Kaeya. Kaeya goes and it made me feel empty. We don't know a lot about Kaeya yet, but we do know that he's probably from Khaenri'ah, and he's probably going to do something really questionable to Mondstadt, and he's probably gonna betray someone. But what we do know is that he did lose his father at a young age, and his current thread with Diluc is severed. We don't know a lot about Kaeya, but in all honesty, just going by how he presents himself, we already know that he's definitely hurting. Kazuha's story is sad. Kazuha's story is one of revenge, grief, loss, and that feeling of helplessness. That feeling of resigning yourself in the beginning, that understanding that you cannot do anything and running away. That's what he did. He ran away from Inazuma and he found Beidou's ship, right? That's how it begins. And then it ends with him going back to Inazuma, with him making the choice of going back to Inazuma to avenge his friend's death. It's a really interesting process of grief, where he ran away at first because he didn't really think he was going to be able to do anything to a Vision Hunt decree, especially when he was a wanted criminal. But then he found hope in the Traveler, and he slowly but surely realized that I am going to avenge my friend. I'm going to make sure that this Vision Hunt decree that he fought so hard to abolish is going to be gone. Keqing. Keqing's very uplifting. Keqing's story is very human, I would say. A lot of his stories are very human. Keqing's story is the prime example of a person wanting to stray away from old traditions. And I won't say this, but as an Asian, I can definitely understand. Keqing's story revolves around independence from a dead, well, literally dead, culture. Of course, she upholds her position as the Liyue Yuhong, but at the same time, you see that part of Keqing that's very unsure of the old traditions of Liyue and wants to change that for the better of Liyue, because she knows that she can't really rely 100% on gods, which I think is a perspective that not a lot of characters have here, like in this game, that they're not very open about, and Keqing gives me a sense of pride. Keqing gives me, you know, like, hey, let's go humanity, we got this. Qiqi's a dead child. Qiqi's story was that she died somewhere in the Archon War. She was relatively preserved by Adepti magic. I'm sorry, but you cannot get any sadder than that. Klee's story is pretty neutral, so I'm going to be putting her here, and I do not feel emotions. Lisa's story is kind of mortifying, I'll be real with you. Lisa's story didn't make me cry, but it did make me rethink about human life. Lisa's story is one about curiosity literally killing the cat. Lisa's story is about the perversion of human intelligence and human knowledge and everything in between. She talks a lot about how Sumeru scholars basically sacrificed their lives, and I'm going to say this right now. There used to be information, I don't know if it's still canon to her lore, because some of the things in the past, especially before the release of the game, are no longer canon. But it says there that Lisa used to delve into the art of the vision and the secrets of elemental and divine magic, and because of that, her lifespan got cut in half. Now, that's not concrete evidence in and of itself, but at the same time, if you actually look at her Tempest Fugit and how she talks about Sumeru and the people there, about how they do everything for uninhibited erudition, it's relatively upsetting, and it's relatively sad. The fact is she's dying. The fact is she's dying. Mona's story is pretty aight. It's a very neutral story, I think. Mona's story doesn't really have a lot going for it besides the loss of her master, and when I say loss, it's that she left. her story is pretty sad because, you know, she is broke, but it's more of a played off as a joke, and Mona herself is actually very self-confident. Mona's story, I guess, would just go to the middle ground, in my personal opinion. It's not sad, but it isn't really, you know, anything else. Her story is balanced, I would say. Ningguang is a very uplifting story. If you don't know, Ningguang used to be very poor when she was young, and she had to live off of rags and basically just the skin of her teeth. And then she slowly but surely became rich because of her own intelligence in the business aspect. Ningguang is a rags to riches story that I personally think is very, very uplifting. Noelle's story has like the same vibe as Chongyun's, where she wants to be a certain way and she wants to strive hard for her goal. But at the same time, I'm personally just uplifted a lot by her, because if you look at her story quest, she always just tells you, I want to be a Knight of Favonius. I want to prove to them that I am good, and I will not let anything stop me. I will make sure that everything that I do for the Knight, even as a maid, is going to be realized. And I think that's very uplifting. I think that's a really, really good morale. Razor has very, very little connection to his living, quote-unquote, living parental figures in the form of the wolves. And Razor is now being forced into a society that, one, he doesn't completely understand, and two, he's not really that adept in human customs because, again, he's raised by a wolf. Just that feeling of isolation, especially when Razor himself is a very, very nice person and is doing his best to try and accommodate for other people that he considers family and friend, I think is just unfortunate circumstances brought upon by the gods, you know, unfortunate. Okay, this one's going to be a little controversial because her story isn't sad. But I feel like if I put her anywhere in the list, I feel like I'm going to get negative karma. She was raised to be an assassin and a murderer at a young age because of her skill, and she was taken away from her home village because it was ransacked by thieves. And then she was brought in by the Knights of Favonius into the cathedral, and that's when she became a nun. But even then, she still kept, you know, being the assassin that she was meant to be. If you don't know, Sayu is not actually a child. Sayu is a grown adult. Sayu's story for me is pretty neutral. Unlike the people here that actually went through something very traumatic or are going through something very life-changing and traumatic, hers is very neutral. Sukursa's story is relatively uplifting actually, so I'm gonna put her down here. Even though like her friend at a young age didn't want to be with her, or I think she lost her at a young age, she still does do what she wants to do, and she still perceives what she wants to perceive. Imagine being forced to help so many people when in the end you just want your sibling. Like, they cannot do anything for them. Like, maybe Aether or Lamine themselves just really don't want to ask anything from the people, right? Like, maybe it's their own moral code. But at the same time, you also have to think about, they've done so much for Teyvat, but Teyvat couldn't do anything for them. Like, anything useful except Dainsleif. Like, dude, are you kidding me? Do we even need to have an explanation why Venti is one of the saddest stories in this game? I feel like we already know. I feel like we already know that all the Archons are going to be up here. These two have lost so much people and so much friends. Like, we don't need to go through all the details, right? Like, they fought 2 wars, probably more, got friends killed friends. They don't need that. Xiangling's is a very blank story, I will say. Out of all the characters here, Xiangling has a really blank story. No offense, Xiangling, I really like you. But Xiangling's story is very basic. She just wants to reinvent what it means for good cuisine in Liyue, and that's basically it. We don't need to go into deep this, right? Like these 3, 4, like we don't need to. Xingqiu's story is very basic. Xingqiu himself isn't really an in-depth character, and it's not really someone that takes the limelight for saddest death or saddest blank in this entire game. Xingqiu's story is basically just a revitalization of the Guhua and what it means for you to actually break out of your family's legacy, and that as a person you have the power to pursue what you want, even if a lot of people don't really agree with that, or if it's even unheard of that you do what you want to do. Xingqiu's life is basically okay. He's rich, but you know, he's okay. Xinyan's story is very, very uplifting. If you do not know, Xinyan every day faces prejudice because of 1, her music, 2, her attitude. And at the same time, a lot of people really didn't like her because she doesn't follow the feminine hobbies of knitting and cross-stitching and stuff like that. And what I really like about Xinyan is that she took that prejudice of people not being able to do feminine things and then switched it over her head. I'm not doing it justice, but I think you should definitely do a read on it. It's a very nice story, personally. Xinyan is a very, very well written character. She underutilized, yes, but if you just look at her motivations, you can definitely see that she wants to pursue music as a form of like giving back to the community, and the people that judge her for quote-unquote being brash and stuff like that definitely just have no right to do that. Yanfei is also a very, very iffy character. She's just in the middle for me personally. Her story about logistics and laws is as cookie cutter as it goes. Nothing too deep, like nothing as deep as like the rest of the people up here, but at the same time she herself is a very uplifting character. So I put her somewhere here, I would say. Yae Miko, we don't actually have a good story on her, but I can definitely already put her here because 1, she lost Baal, she lost Makoto at a young age. And 2, I feel as though she already has connections with the Kitsune Saigu from a young age, which is someone that she most likely lost to the Cataclysm. So I can definitely see Yae Miko being relatively sad. I'll put you a little lower though, since we don't know your story. Sangonomiya Kokomi is also an iffy one. Basically the stories here are just either neutral, where they don't really have anything, somber like Hu Tao's, or if they have their own mixed bags of feelings about their own past. And Sangonomiya Kokomi, I think, has one of the best examples for that, where she's in a really important position, but at the same time she's not really meant to do things, and she's very by the book. So you just have this character that's like flip-flopping between being great and being not great at their job. Kokomi gets the middle ground, I suppose. Thoma, I don't know your story, so you're just getting the middle ground for now. Baiju, no clue. Goru, no clue either. For Yoimiya, we actually do have an interesting part of her story where she does things for people because 1, it makes them happy. So, you know, she's a very uplifting character. She represents fireworks and the joy of festivals, so obviously that's what she's supposed to represent. And another one is that her shop is actually filled with a lot of knickknacks, so I think that's really cute. If you go through her story, she has like a lot of knickknacks from her character story 2 to 5, I think, where she shows, she tells you about like the different toys. Ikuno Kuzushi's story in retrospect is a story about abandonment. And while A does say that she did feel something for the doll itself, we know that from the Surpassing Cup, the third person limited tells you that he was cast aside like worthless dross. Either that's third person omnipotent, where that's actually the case and A wasn't really just wasn't really sure of her emotions, or that's third person limited and Scaramouche feels like he was thrown away. And in all honesty, from an outside perspective, that's exactly what happened. Looking at the logistics, it boils down to A left Scaramouche in the countryside. Even if you say that A felt something and didn't straight up murder him, are you telling me that just because she didn't kill him, she did the right thing? Obviously, she didn't think it was going to live, but we already saw that the damage is done, especially especially to Scaramouche's psyche, because he did feel like he was thrown away like worthless dross and was destined to live a long life with a hollow wit. We know where she's going. Rosalind's story is one about loss and grief and just what can happen to a person when you're angry, vengeful, and just easily manipulated in those emotions. Singora's story is she basically lost her lover in The Maiden's Beloved, which was Rostam, or the White Pup, if I'm not mistaken. And then when she found out that she lost him, she became the Crimson Witch of Flames, which probably triggered her pyro abilities. After that, because of her own enhanced abilities and after fighting the abyss for so long, she became inhuman and she became immortal in a sense. Like it says there, her blood became molten lava, and every time that she bleeds, it's just iron and fire in her veins. And then in the Pale Flame set, the Stainless Bloom, that's when she becomes La Senora because Pierre found her. Her story is just woo. Alright, so there's the final tier list of sad stories in Genshin Impact. Isn't Genshin a really great game? But yeah, that's a dive deep into just how sad this game really is, and whew, why there's Bald Talia there is beyond me, ladies and gentlemen.